It's like the evidence that we have is not with an equity lens. Like there isn't, studies are being done with like 8 white dudes, and that's, cis dudes, and that's like the evidence that we carry on forever, right? Like I can't fix that problem, but what can I do to contribute
Yeah.
to making sure that I'm bringing that lens to the way that I'm teaching, right? Because people ask
Yeah.
about like, well, how do we interpret lab values for, transgender patients, for example? And it's like, what is the evidence that we have and what is the best practice? And it's like, you know what, here's all that we have for data. And this is what the recommendations are. Here's what the guidelines say. Here are what the gaps are. And you just have to think about it, So like, well, hey there, it's Liz Rohr from Real World NP, and you are watching the Real World NP YouTube channel. We make weekly episodes to help save you time, frustration, and help you take the best care of your patients. Hey there, welcome back to season 3 of the Real World NP podcast and YouTube channel. This episode, I'm being interviewed by Louisa Duran, also known as Weez. So I've had the pleasure of working with her as an equity consultant behind the scenes with the Real World NP company, but really she's like an excellent podcast interviewer. So she offered to do an interview with me to talk about what's going on with what's going on with Real World NP, what's new, what's different, and what things are the same, and what you can expect from me, from us, in the next coming weeks to months. So I'm really excited to share this interview. Without further ado, here's my interview of myself about Real World NP. This is also a nice introduction if you're new to the company, or if you've been around for a while. There's a couple little shifts happening. So anyway, without further ado, here is our interview. Okay, welcome. So Weez is a wonderful person in my life, and Weez is interviewing me to kind of like restart this podcast season and kind of like reset the landscape of Real World NP, of like what we're doing, what expectations are, or just an introduction for people who are newer to Real World NP. So we're just
Yeah.
going to have a little conversation, answer some questions, talk about myself very uncomfortably.
I mean, I think the other important thing, I'm sure that you feel like this, and your listeners probably in their personal lives and professional lives can attest to this, is I think every few years we also, or I guess the goal, right, is that every few
Yeah.
years we're evolving, we're changing, we're not the same versions of ourselves, right?
Yeah.
The more that we learn, the different versions of ourselves come out because of that learning, right? Again,
Totally.
professionally and personally. So I generally think that, especially as an entrepreneur and a person who has the freedom to like shift and shape business however they see fit,
Yeah.
it's really important just to be like, hey, I know that you're used to a thing, and like, cool, great, fundamentally this is still the same thing, but I'm not the same person.
Yeah.
And so that
Totally.
means that my offers aren't going to be the same. What I create isn't going to be the same. And I just think we should normalize that, right? Like just having those conversations of like, yeah, I'm not the same person. Don't expect the
Absolutely.
same things from me.
I think that's so true also for people in the clinical space that
Hmm.
like, and I feel like this has come up in a number of interviews that I've had, but it's like I think that so many people are caught in this kind of like perfectionist, high achieving thing that it's like they go through like all the school and the whole thing. And then they get there and they're like, I don't know if I like this, and that like permission giving, I feel like it's just such a theme. And it's like, even if you loved it 3 years ago, like you get to try something new.
Yeah. Yeah. I will say that's probably the one thing that my mentors when I was in undergrad like really instilled in me. And like to
Yeah.
my certain family members' dismay because they wanted me to major in certain things.
Yeah.
But I literally like I had to pause and be like, okay, in 10 years,
Hmm.
what will I be glad that I had a background in at the very least?
Yeah.
Right? Because I need something that's going to allow me to like be malleable and shift and change. And so, shout out to my mentors. But I think
Totally.
that TLDR, if you guys don't listen to anything else we say, give yourself permission to change and evolve and be different.
Totally.
And also accept that like sometimes the thing that old you chose is not the thing that new you is going to like at all. And
Yeah.
that's okay. But
Totally.
so on that note, so the last episode that you had, you let people know you were going on hiatus, you had the conversation about capacity. So fast forward to now, here we
Yeah.
are.
Totally.
how is it feeling? What is capacity like? Where are you at energetically?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, like, I've had some time to think about what I want the company to look like. Like, I think that I definitely fell into that trap of, like, well, this is what it started as, and it, like, has to
Mhm.
be this way, and something just, like, wasn't feeling really great about it, and so you and I have had some great conversations about, like, what are the possibilities going forward. So, I think it was really scary for me to put out a podcast episode where I was just like, "I'm gonna be a human and not," and, like, just let you know that I don't know when I'm gonna come back. But I feel like every time I do little scary things like that, it definitely, like, gets easier and makes a difference, which, like, I always tie back to, like, when I think about my listeners is just, like, people who are listening rather, like, um, doing those little scary pieces, like, little bits at a time, like, really does make a difference, especially when there's, like, a big thing of, like, do I wanna change jobs? Do I wanna even be in this career anymore? Stuff like that. But yeah, I definitely am feeling, more at peace with giving myself the grace that I would like to have,
Yeah.
and I hope that it can be, like, a model for people to give themselves grace too.
Yeah. I think that's super important, right? Modeling behavior, and I think what you're really speaking to, and for people that don't know me, I love analogies and and similes and all the things, and so I am not a medical professional, which maybe we should have started with, but I like to try. Liz will tell you, I like to try to find relevant,
Totally.
uh, analogies. So that being said, I the way that I look at it is really, developing a tolerance, right? Or sometimes, like, if you can develop a resistance to something, right? Good or bad, like in the medical world. If you take a medicine, or a particular antibiotic, like too many times, your body develops a resistance. But at the same time, if you microdose something, you develop a tolerance for being able to, your body can just hold a lot more,
Yeah.
right? From a very sciency, actual, like anatomical perspective. And so in my work, I look at it as like it's the same thing, it's just energetic,
Yeah.
right? And I think a lot of times, unfortunately, um, and I'm speaking for my impression, so you correct me if I'm wrong.
Totally.
But I look at, my friends and my peers, and loved ones that are, in various segments of the medical world, and there's a lot of ignoring of the, like, that internal, like, nervous system and the body and the
Oh,
tolerance
yeah.
for it. And so I think it's amazing that you did all the little scary things, because as a clinician, you're definitely taught to ignore that.
Oh, 100%, 100%. Yeah, and it's just I think one of the things that I, um, really struggled with when I started the company, but also, like, still I just recognize in people is just, like, there's just such a oppressive culture of what healthcare culture industry is, and
Mhm.
so, it's so hard to imagine what the other possibilities are. Like, I know you and I have talked about a lot about, like, behind the scenes of running a company, and it just occurred to me the other day, like, I all of my working experience up to this point, the last 4.5 years was in, healthcare, in health and
Mhm.
hospital, followed by, primary care clinic, and so it's just so, like, this is how things are. And I really love being able to share with the podcast. Like, I love talking about clinical stuff. Like, I don't talk about it as much. Like, I like having having guests on and interviews and things like that, but I also really love having that opportunity to talk about, like, how we can do things differently in healthcare, like, with starting with, like, ourselves and how we show up in healthcare.
Yeah, so I think that is a perfect segue, right? So you're back, you've done some capacity searching. We've had a lot of conversations that involved bulldozing all of the things that you, like, had previously been socialized and taught, to believe were, like, true or the only way to do things. And
Totally.
so now here you are.
Yeah.
So before we talk about kind of the shifts and where you're going to go in business, I think let's just do a little reminder, a refresher for folks. Like, what is Real World MP? Why Real World MP? And because of your very extensive time, right, in practice, what were you seeing that led you to want to create the business?
Totally. Yeah, and I've shared the story a little bit, but I do feel like it has shifted. So I started in 2019 after I'd been a nurse practitioner for about 3.5 years. Um, because basically what happened is that I always knew going into clinical practice that I'd want to do clinical something and something else. Like, is it going to be teaching? Is it going to be health policy? Something like that, some combination. And I got to a place like, and I had had my daughter, And so I was juggling like being a parent, being a full-time nurse practitioner, and I was like, I'm not happy. And I kind of got to that moment of like, is this what this is? Like, is this it kind of thing? Where I've just heard so many people, especially in the podcast recently, where I've had guests have that moment of like, is this the right place? And so for me, I was like, I really want to teach. Like, that's the thing I want to try to do. And so I tried to pursue various teaching positions. I don't have a doctorate. I only have a master's at this point. So a lot of those positions required a doctorate. And so the associate positions in a traditional setting, it was not working out. And I was like, you know what, why don't I just teach online? Why don't I just like make some videos? Because the thing that I really wanted to do was that I had this core frustration that is not unique to me, where people graduate from NP school and they're like, I'm sorry, I'm in charge now? Like what? Like what? Like what?
Like,
Um,
I'm the adult now?
like absolutely no way should I be at the end of the line
Yeah.
authority in this situation. So nobody feels prepared when they graduate. But I think that there's also some real core frustrations that people have with the healthcare industry as with healthcare education, specifically for nurse practitioners. I'm sure that physicians have their own complaints and physician associates too. But I think that there is this core frustration that is not unique to me, where it's like, I feel like I wish I had known more, and I wish
Mhm.
I had known more real world practical things. I want to know how things work in the real world. That's why the company name is as it is, because that's the phrase that people use. People are like, oh, you're the nurse practitioner real world. I'm like, no. I'm just talking about, yeah, I had to choose a name that was like you could make a website out of, whatever. But that was the gist of it, is like, let's talk about like the real world stuff that we don't cover
Yeah.
enough in school. And so I just had this vision for online teaching with YouTube videos. I eventually switched to a podcast a couple years later in addition to the YouTube channel. But yeah, I wanted to create course. I wanted to do a create. I was also really frustrated with the fact that the way that we're trained in the real world is not uniform.
Mm.
Like, it's not really standardized, and a lot of people are kind of thrown to the wolves, as they say, and people just like figure it out as they go. And it's sort of on them to like self advocate for what their needs are and like how to get support when they don't even necessarily know what they need because they're brand new. So I was frustrated with the lack of mentorship. I was frustrated with things I wanted to learn more about, and so I wanted to bring that kind of like into this space to really kind of help with both the healthcare industry as well as the education kind of system. I think especially since our work together, I think number one, I think that there's a fair amount of delusion one needs to have to create a company. Delusional
I can
self
agree
belief.
I can agree with that, yeah. You
I
gotta be
feel
a
like
little delulu.
a little delulu. So I know I was a little delulu when I first started the company. And I was like, you know what? Who cares? We'll see if this works out.
Yeah.
I paid a bunch of money to a lawyer to make sure that I had all my ducks in a row. I did a little bit of business training. Like, let's just break even. That'd be great. But I think that the kind of shift that's been true for me is that I kind of had this like very much like I'm gonna fix things
Mm.
delusion. And it's like, oh, actually, like I can be a contributor, but like this is a very much larger system issue. And like here are some ways that I can contribute, by talking about patient centered care, by making education that's like both comprehensive but also concise. Like it's not fluffy, it's just like get to the point, it's really practical.
Yeah.
And then like, yeah, it's like, I mean, you and I have talked about this a lot, is that I'm really working on developing my equity lens so that we can kind of bring more of those conversations to the healthcare teaching itself, because that is sorely, like, not just the content is lacking, but that lens is sorely lacking.
Mhm.
So yeah, that's kind of the story of how we got here. And I started with a combination of mentorship and online courses, and the online courses, I thought it was going to be 50-50, but it like way took off for courses. So yeah, so I've since I'm transitioning into more course based and less into mentorship.
Yeah, so I mean, and that's a great next perfect segue, right? So you have this business, you were operating in a space of delusion, which you have to. I mean, as a business
Yeah,
owner, I don't know a
yeah.
single business owner that we're all just a little bit delusional. You have to be. You
Yeah.
have to be a combination of delusional and overly zealous and highly confident, but then to not, like, become, like, an evil billionaire, also, like, be from a service be coming at it from, like,
Yes.
a service-oriented place, right? So it's like,
Yeah.
"Here's a problem. I have an idea for a solution." And then the rest of the delusions kick in.
Yeah.
I think people miss that a lot of times, right? And they forget that we're just people, and I'm kind of planting the seed because I wanna come back to this with you, but we're just people that had an idea that part of it is preparation, part of it is vision, and then the other part is really hard work.
Yeah.
Um, that provided a unique solution in a way that people related to,
Yeah.
right? So, but yeah, you got to be a little bit off your rocker to be like bet everything on myself. And I wouldn't. I mean, I think you'd say the same thing. Like I would never have picked anything else.
Yeah.
Like, I would do this over and over.
Totally.
But so, yeah, so we're gonna plant that seed about what kind of human you have to be,
Totally.
because I think that gets lost in all of this. But so now you have your business. The courses are doing great, right?
Totally.
Um, so where are you now? Like 2019 to 2024, you're
Yeah.
5 years in. As anyone right knows, you start something with you're bright-eyed and you're bushy-tailed and you have a lot of ideas and hopes and you think things are going to go a certain way and then you get 5 years in and you're like, "Well, that wasn't exactly what I thought it was gonna be, right? And so then,
Totally.
like we started the episode by saying, you evolve, you change, and as you as a human evolve and change, then your business, your business does as well. So
Yeah.
where is Real World MP now?
Totally. Um, I think, yeah, I think that like when in terms of like the behind the scenes of the journey, like I definitely was still operating in that kind of like hustle and grind space that I think healthcare
Mhm,
really encourages us to do.
mhm,
And I was so excited, and I'm still excited. Like I still really believe in the mission and vision of the company. I think at the time it was so novel that I was able to kind of tap in extra hard into the hustle and grind, and I
mhm,
got really burnt out
mhm.
for a long time. So I'm in recovery. I'm getting better, but yeah, I think one of the things I've been trying to assess is like um, and in sharing the origin story, like, I guess hold on, pause for a sec. In sharing the origin kind of like of how the company came about, like, I do want to acknowledge that like so many people are in this perspective of like the reason that they went into like becoming a nurse practitioner is because a lot of people worked as a nurse and they were working at the end of the line of care and they were like, this feels futile. Like I'm doing a good job, but it's like it's not really making the impact that I want to make. And so people
Mm,
go and to the prevention side and they want to make a big difference, and I think that they still want that. Um so yeah, I guess I just want to like share in terms of I think that it can be very frustrating to like have that experience and not have the mentorship and not have the education that you want. I think that for now I'm going to transition more into the course making instead of the mentorship. Maybe we'll revisit that at a certain point, but yeah, I really want to make I really want to like well, one of the things I'm really excited about is like making courses in collaboration with specialists because
mhm.
basically, if I'm like true to myself, if I'm like really honest, when I first started the company, I was like, I want someone to be doing this, but nobody's doing it in the way that I want it to. So I'll just do it. But it would be really nice if I could just like have someone that's like way more experienced and smarter than I am and I could just ask them questions. So one of the
Yeah.
things that we're going to do is work on some courses with specialists and be able to expand that reach where it's like, um, there's in primary care, it's like we're, Jack, Jill, Jay of all trades, but master of none. But we're kind of expected to like do a lot of connecting of the dots for all of those specialties. But there's like so many barriers in between. So yeah, so one of my hopes is to expand the course catalog so that we can have more specialists coming in and have them become certified. So that's the thing that we're kind of working towards behind the scenes.
Yeah. So I want to take a little bit of a left turn,
Totally.
because I think you said something that I I want you to elaborate on from the perspective of being a nurse practitioner with, all the years of experience that you have, um, at the intersection of all the work that you've been doing
Totally.
to liberate yourself from a lot of that patterning, right? And the
Totally.
training of hustle and grind and perfectionism and people pleasing, not just as a nurse practitioner, but also as a business owner.
Yeah.
Um, because it's incredibly frustrating, like you said, to be a service-oriented person who is like, "I wanna make a difference.
Yeah.
I want things to be better. I wanna help people,
Yeah.
and I have no support,
Yeah.
or I don't." I mean, our education system across the board,
Yeah.
unfortunately, is lacking in a lot of ways, right?
Totally.
So it's like I don't have maybe all the tools that I need. I don't have the support. And then I look around, and anytime I like want to ask for support or get the support as a culture, just generally as a culture, right? But from what I know about our time working together
Yeah.
is more it is more so right in the kind of nurse practitioner world is like then you look around and you're like, well, I almost don't want to ask somebody
Hmm.
something because then they're going to question whether I'm good enough or I know how to do my job or I'm
Yeah.
competent or they're going to get annoyed because
Hmm.
they have 1,000 things on their plate and then they're like,
Totally.
are you asking me this? Whatever. Like,
Totally.
I don't have time to answer this for you. I've got this caseload or whatever the case is, right?
Totally.
Um, and I think that the way that you teach and the way that you create curriculum and the way that you I know mentorship might come back, but like even the way that you just like guide folks through their learning journey takes that reality into account. And I think
Yeah.
that's actually what makes you because there's other companies that do what you do.
Yeah.
But they don't do what you do the way that you do, and they
Yeah.
certainly don't bring in that lens.
Yeah.
So I would love for you to talk a little bit more about that because I think that is really unique to real world MP.
Hmm. You mean the kind of like humanity lens of
Yeah,
being a
bringing
clinician?
in that the reality of that experience, right?
Yeah.
So it's like, for example, even just the gentleness,
Yeah.
like the company has an ethos, right? It has a
Yeah.
vibe, it has an energy.
Yeah.
Um and it's just like that, right? Even just the
Yeah.
gentleness of being able to step into a space or an educational container
Yeah.
in an industry that is not
It's
gentle
toxic
to
and
their people,
harsh.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and like one of the like that, for example, as an element of how y'all do things differently.
Totally. Yeah, I mean, I think that's always been a real core piece for me is that it's like the naming of that experience. Like, I think it's not, yeah, it's never just about the education and about doing a good job. It's like, there's this like, yeah, I've really felt that like compulsion to like really name what the experience is because it's like when I've done the research of putting this together and as I talk to people, it's like the same words are being used the whole time and people feel lonely and they feel like they're the only one that's struggling. And so, yeah, I mean, I think that I'm really just trying to um yeah, just like bring that humanity type of perspective of like we get to be full people, we get to have feelings, we get to have needs, um and like we're not alone in any of this. Yeah, I don't know, I think I feel a little funny because it's like me talking about like what makes me different, like, so I don't know if you have any like follow-up questions, but I don't know anything that you can name or whatever.
I mean, I get that it feels like weird and awkward and funny. And I also say that because I'm the exact same way. And I
Mhm.
think it's important for people to hear the why behind that difference or also that that difference exists.
Yeah,
Right? Like you can actually choose to get your education and your mentorship free
yeah,
of the toxicity that exists generally in our professional culture, right?
yeah,
But most more specifically within the medical the professional culture of medicine, right?
totally.
You can
Yeah,
actually get education without shame and
yeah,
without the grind and without the hustle and without the guilt or whatever that kind of comes
yeah,
along with not knowing. Like, which is
yeah.
always as an aside wild to me because it's like none of us knew what we didn't know when we didn't know it until we knew it.
Totally, totally.
Like I you figure the things out after 10 years, but it like
Yeah,
year 1 me, man, just didn't know the things, and that's okay.
totally.
And
Yeah.
so I know it
Yeah, I
feels
just
weird, but I think it's important to note that you do that
totally.
differently.
Yeah, I mean, I think so I guess I can talk about frustrations that I've had in other places, maybe that will help highlight it too, but it's like, um yeah, I mean, I think that there's like you really like named that experience that people have and everybody says the same thing of like they don't wanna bother people with their questions. They
Mhm.
feel embarrassed, they feel yeah, they like especially asking clinical questions, they feel like, "Am I" they already have imposter syndrome, so it really just exacerbates it. So I really do try to foster that community of like, there are no dumb questions. Like we have a Facebook group that goes with the lab course and people submit patient cases and, I'll post in there like there are no dumb questions. What questions do you have? And it's like any little thing is fine because like that unease that you have is gonna follow through. Like you have enough hold to hold. And if you have that like little bug in your ear of like, oh, did I do that right? Or, that yeah, that I hate that. I hate the in the healthcare industry, this kind of like proving hierarchical like bullying, especially, and it really is horrible. I mean, other people listening in this as nurse practitioners probably have seen this, but it's very I mean, there are bullies, and it's like you'd think that people wouldn't bully in healthcare, but they do. Nurses and nurse practitioners bully each other. So I really do, yeah. I mean, I really do want real world NP to have this welcoming, like judgment free, like person centered, like not just person, like nurse practitioner person, but like patients, right? Like they get to be people too, and we get to have patient centered conversations where we're both autonomous individuals and they have sovereignty and choice over what they do, and we just get to present the options and the risks and benefits. um yeah, and I really do want to bring, like, I mean, with guidance, of course, like I'm developing my discernment lens more in terms of equity. Like I want to make sure that um like as I'm producing things, like the evidence that we have is not with an equity lens. Like there
Mhm.
isn't, studies are being done with like like 8 white dudes, and that's cis dudes, and that's like the evidence that we carry on forever, right? Like I can't fix that problem, but what can I do to contribute
Yeah.
to making sure that I'm bringing that lens to the way that I'm teaching, right? Because people ask
Yeah.
about like, well, how do we interpret lab values for transgender patients, for example, and it's like, what is the evidence that we have and what is the best practice? And it's like, here's all that we have for data. And this is what the recommendations are. Here's what the guidelines say. Here are what the gaps are. And you just have to think about it. So like, I don't know. I don't feel like there's that warm and cushy anywhere that I've seen. And it's like, there's also, I don't see a ton of the equity lens piece either. So those are definitely two things that I can try to contribute in the way that I can. Even if I'm not going to fix the healthcare system, I'm not going to fix
Yeah.
education, right? Like I've reframed that of like that's not how that works. No, you can help, but you're not going to fix it.
Yeah, I mean, I love the goal, I love the desire, but no, definitely not.
Yeah, but it doesn't mean that
I'm
we don't do things, because I think that,
right.
I mean, that's like a real lesson that I've learned from you, Weeze, is that um, talking about how we make changes, because I think that people really are invested in change. And
Mhm.
if you haven't checked out Weeze's work, please do. I'm going to link all the places because your
Thank
work
you.
is amazing. But that, like that, do you mind if I share about Eyes of Oppression? Can I say that
Yeah,
or
sure.
no? Is
Yeah,
that
yeah, yeah, go ahead. That's not a me thing, that I learned that
Oh, I
sophomore
think I
year.
lost you again.
Oh, am I back? Hello? Are we back? What is happening? Can you not hear
Weeze.
me? Am I frozen?
I lost you. No, I
Oh,
hear you now, but it just froze for a
okay.
second.
That's super weird. Okay. Yeah, you can share about Eyes of Oppression. That's a very widely used. I mean, the way that I explain it is different.
Yeah.
So the only difference is that the Eyes of Oppression are obviously the eyes, and then my spin on it is how do we use it as a tool the opposite way to dismantle systems, but you can
Yeah. So do
absolutely
you mind
share
if I
about it.
share about that? Or do
Yeah.
you
Yeah,
mind
yeah,
if I
yeah.
say that? Oh, okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Well, I was gonna say one of the like that was, I mean, I've learned so many lessons from you, but that one was super impactful, talking about like the way that we actually impact change is
Mhm.
like the eyes of oppression are there's the institute, there's the ideology, the
Mhm.
institution, the interpersonal, and then the individual. Like, what is like the global idea versus like who is carrying those on versus the how we relate to each other versus the beliefs that we have. And that's how
Mhm.
you teach things, is like how do we do it in ourselves so that we can actually impact change. Like you can't actually impact the system from the top, you impact it from the bottom. So
Mhm.
I think it's just I just think that like little core piece alone is like just so helpful for people who get really discouraged in the healthcare industry, because it's like,
Yeah.
oh my god, it's just so big and there's so many problems and so many people like just get discouraged and they want to give up. And we still like have to assess what our capacity is and what our roles are in that, but it does make a difference. And so
Yeah.
like I'm not like, "Oh, I can't make a difference. Oh, that's horrible. I'm not going to do anything." It's like, "No, no,
Yeah.
this is like my individual role and how
Right.
I can help in this little way."
Right. I mean, and I will say, as like an obviously somebody who is again not a medical professional but experiences medicine and healthcare as just like an individual who has a lot
Mhm.
of my own like medical trauma dealing with medical professionals, that it makes the world of difference when you come across, and it unfortunately is always nurses or the nurse practitioners. Like, it's really okay, at least in my experience and in talking to people that I
It's
know, it's never the
terrible.
doctors that are like doing this for you, right? But it's the
Yeah.
nurses and the nurse practitioners who have adopted this perspective that you're speaking of like patient first, right? Of like really
Mhm.
listening. Those are the ones that have made, like, I remember to this day, like, some of the nurses' names and faces from, like, when I was hospitalized 11 years ago. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? And, like, I
No,
was
it's so
there for 7
true.
days, so I saw tons of people, but, like, I
Yeah.
will never forget some of those people.
Yeah.
It makes such a huge difference, so I think just to drop that little nugget as well is like that's why that it's like the you're changing like bottom up is so
Yeah.
important, not just because that's what we actually have control over, but because, and this is honestly how I orient myself towards the work, is like if every single day I've at least changed somebody's experience with
Yeah.
whatever industry you're in or whatever it is that you do, then like that is change, that is actionable, that is tangible.
Yeah.
Right? So it's like if as a nurse or nurse practitioner, you're like, "Well, today I impacted one patient. They felt heard. They felt
Yeah.
seen. They heard me say, "Hey, you know what? Like maybe BMI is not the most accurate tool and XYZ or whatever whatever. Or actually, like I'm hearing you say that you are in pain and so I'm not going to follow these medical guidelines based on race and all these other things that we know are
Yeah.
inaccurate." Right?
Yeah.
And I'm going to actually listen to you. Like that's one that you made a change. That
Yeah.
person is going to remember that moment
Yeah.
for the rest of their lives. They're not and that also aids in like the repatterning of what happens in our body when we come up, against these systems. So I think, for anyone who needed to hear that, just as the reminder,
Yeah.
yeah, none of us are going to
Yeah.
change the whole thing, but we can impact individuals. We can change we all have a sphere of influence,
100%. Yeah,
right?
and, yeah, and I think hope that I know a lot of people in the community are kind of still in that people-pleasing, perfectionist,
Mhm.
high-achieving place, and it can be hard to absorb positive stuff like that, but I think
Yeah.
I would encourage anybody listening to think about, like, it really does make a difference, because I think one of the things that I want to help with and I worry about is, how burnt out people are getting in healthcare, especially after COVID.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it can be really discouraging, to feel like you don't make a difference, because things feel so huge, but you really do.
Right.
And
Yeah.
it is like it is so impactful. I guess like I think I told you about this. Like the other day, I had a dermatologist appointment, and I just like cried because I was like,
Yeah.
oh, someone actually is listening to me and helping me for after 10 years of this skin challenge, like who actually cares. And hopefully they'll come on the podcast, because they're amazing. But yeah,
Yeah. I mean, it does. It makes a world of difference. Even just, I mean, we can get into the whole, reality also of just like stress on the body and what that does to your nervous system and how long that lasts in your body. So being no one wants to be with any medical professional, right? Like I'm not like, "Yes, let me
yeah.
go sit with whoever. I don't care what level you're at, right? Like, I don't want to be here. I don't want to be at the doctor's office. I don't want to be at the dentist. I don't want to be at the hospital. Like, no one wants to be here.
Mm,
Um, period. Right. So it's like it is really hard to hear the positives when you're probably told all day long that you did the smallest thing wrong or not fast enough or whatever. Um but I think those are the important things to hold on to, um,
totally.
at the intersection of finding spaces like Real World MP that's gonna say, "Hey, you know what? There's not a single dumb question, and
Yeah.
I'd rather you ask it here."
Yeah.
Right? And get the clarity and get the answers because there's also so much that having just the confidence, and, like, the self-assuredness of your own, like, processing and thinking and, like, knowledge, that goes a long way to combating the people pleasing and the perfectionism, right?
Yeah.
And, like, the way that that comes up in the body, and I don't think people realize that. Just being able to be in a space like yours will make a huge
Yeah.
difference for them. Huge
Yeah.
difference, right?
Totally.
Because imagine being able to walk in and you have a physician being like, "Well, XYZ did it," and you're like, "Actually, that's factually incorrect, and, I know that it is." right? Like, that
Totally.
goes a long way.
Definitely.
Yeah. Okay. So we talked a little bit about the curriculum and how, right, over the last couple years, it's not necessarily shifted, but like it's really getting infused with, more of this real world MP ethos.
Totally.
I want to touch a little bit on the business
Sure.
because I don't think that people
Know that
fully
this is not a
recognize.
hobby.
Basically,
I
like, I don't think people realize that, right? So the
Yeah,
same
no.
way that you are intentionally and actively creating spaces for other people to show up with their questions, with their humanity, and you're honoring it and it's shame-free and, all of the things, you've also created a business
Yeah.
that reflects those same belief systems.
Yeah. Totally.
So I think that it's important for people to also hear, like, what can they expect, because they're not just getting the education, right? They're engaging with a
Yeah.
business and with a team. What can people expect from
Yeah.
real world MP as a business? Because you also have decolonial liberatory business practices that are very
Yeah.
different just from like business, quote unquote, as it's supposed to be done, right? Like bro
Yeah.
marketing, a
Yeah.
la bro marketing, but
Yeah.
then is very different from quote unquote professionalism and medical
Yeah.
professionalism in general.
So I think like the way that I used to do things, like I think I was very much like in that culture of like how things were done in healthcare. And so some of the things I would do, like I already kind of said, was like the hustle and grind thing, and I was available all the time. And because I deeply care for people on in these spaces and struggling with the things they're struggling with, like I think I would do things like I would be in my DMs all the time, for example, on Instagram, and sending people messages back and voice messages back. Like when people ask questions, like clinical questions on like the YouTube channel comments, for example, or we'll write in emails into our customer service inbox with kind of the situation that's going on or a specific patient question. It was very hard for me not to want to jump in and like be there and be with the people. And I think I realized that that was one of the contributors to burnout. And so and then I also kind of had this thing too of like how I did things is like I had very like high production value videos that I had to present myself in this professional way, which yes, pause that thought, but what is even professionalism? But I just had this conception of like how I had to be, and I actually got feedback from people of like I was too casual, even with that whole, they had some things to say. I'm like, okay, well, I'm not the
Y'all
educator for you then.
hate my videos.
But yeah, like this person said that in my teaching I was too casual, like not even in my presentation. So those are some of the things that I would do before. I know, or that I would talk too fast, which I know that I do. And so I've tried to work on that because I know there's different learning speeds and styles, but I've also directed them to the settings button where you can speed it up and slow it down. But yeah, so I think that some of the shifts are kind of like what is professionalism in the first place? What is like me being authentically human, which is why I don't have makeup on. I have whatever clothes I want to wear today. Um, and yeah, and then I've just been setting more boundaries with people where, I do like again, I deeply want to support people, and that's my own like personal work journey of like I can't help everybody just because I can doesn't mean that I should, and I have capacity limitations, and so what are the containers that I can support people in? So, inside of the courses, for example, there are specific guidelines of like you can present patient cases in the lab course specific to the lab materials. And then in the diabetes, hypertension, and CKD course, like you can ask questions as well, clarifying the material, but I don't have capacity to take patient questions there, at least at this time, with the staffing that we have and my capacity. So, yeah. And then like we have things like a work week. We have a 4-day work week for myself and the team where it's, Monday through Thursday, 10 to 4 is our quote unquote business hours. We just like don't do urgency because there's nothing life threatening about the work that we do. And I think that's really hard for people. And it's been really hard for me to divest from urgency because so much of healthcare is about hypervigilance and, I need something now. Everything feels really urgent because a lot of times you are dealing with life and death, but
Mhm.
we are not. And so that's one of the practices that hopefully I'm trying to model. It feels for people who are not accustomed to boundaries, that might feel a little bit harsh. But it's, hopefully it's a nice model that it's like you get to take a second too and like not be motivated by, the urgency. And I know it feels urgent right now that you need access to something, for example. That feels really stressful. And, we get to treat people with humanity too. And I think that hopefully, we're trying to set some more boundaries in that. And most people are very kind and when they reach out in terms of like the inbox or in direct messages or stuff like that. But there can be that sometimes too, where people bring in that intensity and their experiences of being talked poorly to us. So yeah, so that would be a request. I don't know if that's a request or a boundary, but just to remember that everybody is a human, myself, my team members, you get to be a human, like I hope I and the team try to hold, all this space for our clients and customers and audience members, humanities. So trying to have that mutuality piece there.
So I think what I want to reiterate for people, because I don't want them to like miss one of the points, because I think about it I always think about how could things potentially land with people based
Yeah.
on either how, right, like our social narratives, our social contracts, all those things. And I want to make sure people heard what you said, right? Because
Beautiful. I would love
you
that. Thank you.
well, because here's the thing, I guarantee
Mhm.
that somebody, for all of their own, because of their own experiences and also because of how we're socialized, what they heard was like, if you're not going to be like, if your energy isn't like balanced or calm or like gentle and soft, like don't bring it over here,
Mhm.
right? Because that is a lot of times what we're told, and that's not what was said, right? And I know this to be true because
Yeah.
I know that you and team, and especially when y'all do have mentorship spaces, will
Yeah.
hold everything. You can come in
Yeah.
stressed, you can come in frazzled, you can even be spiraling, right? In fact, those are probably the times you should
Absolutely.
ask for support.
Yeah,
That
absolutely.
that's not what's said, right? You can have all your feelings. That is literally the point of being in spaces that honors the fullness of your humanity. That means the fullness of every single piece of your human experience and that human expression. The
Yeah.
distinction
Yeah.
is that just because you are frustrated because you had a hard day or whatever, or just because something feels urgent to you, doesn't mean you get to talk to people like you don't have any sense.
Yeah.
I don't know how to make that like any, sound any more professional for those who need my teaching to be more professional, because that's just what it is. Unfortunately, we live in a society where when somebody's having a bad day or when someone has big feelings about something that are either heavy or energetically charged or quote unquote dubbed negative emotions, negative feelings, that
Yeah.
we end up mistreating and dishonoring other people and their humanity simply because we are in a quote unquote negative, right? Or like frazzled,
Yeah.
energetically imbalanced place. And
Yeah.
that is also a part of liberation, right? Recognizing that like I can be having a bad day. We have bad days. I can be off my game. Maybe my boss talked to me like they had no sense, right? Because they don't know how to honor my humanity, whatever.
Yep.
But
Yeah.
that never excuses, and this happens a lot specifically for small business entrepreneurs,
Yeah.
um that never excuses somebody coming into DMs or inboxes or any space where you
Yeah.
are accessible and then mistreating you, right? Like
Yeah.
that's that thing we do where we punch down, where it's like, well, I kind of got beat up on, and so
Yeah.
now I'm going to punch down and bring that energy over here,
Yeah.
right? Or hey, I know I got an autoresponder that says that y'all are only available 10 to 4 Monday through Thursday and you have a 48-hour return window, but I emailed you 7 minutes ago and I wanted it 7 minutes ago. And because you didn't give it to me 7 minutes ago, even though you very clearly outlined your boundaries to me, I am now going to follow up with an email and I'm going to tell you I want a refund, or you're trash, or now I'm attacking you, or now I'm talking to whoever's responding, whatever sweet baby angel is not the business owner, right? Who's managing the inbox. Like, in a
Yeah.
rude and brisk way or whatever the case is. So
Yeah.
I think that's really important to note, because we need to you know me, I say the thing as it needs to be said. And so that is the behavior that we do see from people that own businesses, or
Yeah.
rather from people that engage with us as business owners and engage with our businesses.
Yeah.
Um and there is that distinction. You get to have all your feelings. You can even show up in the inbox and being like,
Yeah.
I'm having a terrible day, I'm totally spiraling, I'm
Yep.
sorry. I'll say that sometimes, like, even in text
Totally.
messages to friends or to other people, like, I'm
Yeah.
having a really bad day. I'm sorry if I seem short. It has nothing to do with you. Or,
Yeah.
you know what? I already know that my energy is going to bleed everywhere. So I'm going to remove myself. Like, my phone is going on do not disturb. Hey, mom, I
Yeah.
love you. Don't worry about me. I'll talk to you tomorrow. Right? Like, whatever the case is.
Yeah.
Um, and so I'm going to say it because you didn't. Like, we, you know, you will create the space for
Totally.
people to have their feelings, but not for people to
Totally.
use those feelings as an excuse to mistreat others.
Yeah. Definitely.
So you can
Definitely.
come be mad at me if that upset you.
I think for the most part, people are very kind and
Yeah,
respectful for the most part.
yeah,
But I think like also, I don't know. I think hopefully that's just also an invitation to think about. I think what it makes me think of is that it's so different doing things with humanity in mind. The work that I've done like with the company and like the way that I do things, it's like it just reminds me of being in the clinic and like there's no humanity. It's just
yeah,
not. It's so novel. And so
yeah.
sometimes people like don't even realize that they're having a bad day and then they take it out on
You take
somebody,
it out.
you know?
Yeah,
So I just really like empathize with people. If this is really novel for you to like, yeah, there's like a bit of grief there. Like I have a little bit of grief thinking about this, you know? It's like,
yeah. Well, I
healthcare is
think that's
hard.
the it is, but I think that's the beauty of the reminder. You get to have a bad day.
Yeah.
You get to be frazzled or pissed or frustrated. Like you even get to realize that you're being short with people or maybe a little more
Yeah.
brusque than you'd normally be. Right? Like that is the beauty of humanity.
Yeah.
Just when you're alerted to it or when you realize it yourself, you don't get to, it's not a justification, right? Or it's not an
Yeah.
excuse. Like it's an invitation to be like, wow, I need, like, you know what? I need to resource myself, or I need to pause, or I need to enter into a mentorship space that is going to be able to like guide me through this, or I need to just not talk to anybody for an hour or whatever the thing is, right? Like again,
Totally.
it's an invitation. And I'm naming all of this because these are things that y'all can be doing at work even because there are
Yeah.
going to be people that do that to you
Yeah.
and you're right like don't take it on. It's not yours, that's a them thing.
Yeah.
And maybe that means you have to go hide in a closet.
Mhm.
I've done that before in corporate where you're like, I'm like, I'm not even joking. I'm like, I'm gonna get paper. And I'm just like in a closet.
When I
And
when I
like
was in
I'm
the
just like,
hospital,
"Ugh."
the med room was the place that you went to cry in a
Yeah.
hospital setting.
Yes. Go
This we didn't
cry.
yeah, yeah. I was more like
Right?
the bathroom, I think, in clinic, but
Yeah. Or paper closets, whatever, supply
totally,
closets, whatever it is.
totally.
Okay, so before we wrap up,
Mhm.
and maybe you don't have an answer to this yet, which is like we're just going to model that for folks, right? But it's
Yeah,
like what can people expect for the moment,
yeah,
whether it's with regards to the podcast or any other resources you're going to be putting out, any educational stuff,
totally,
blogging, Instagramming, courses, whatever. What have you
totally.
decided is true in this moment?
Yeah, so I think, yeah, so there's a couple of things. So one is that I really do enjoy the podcast, I love doing interviews. So I have a number of interviews coming up. I'm probably going to stick to that every other week cadence for now.
Mhm.
Maybe that will change. I'm trying to. I guess what I'm trying to do is like allow for like lots of possibilities, and I think it's really
Yeah.
hard when there are people in the kind of like traditional like this is how you do business, quote unquote. Um, that it's like, you have to choose a cadence of what you're gonna do and stick to it for the rest of your life, and it's like, "Okay, how about not?" Because I also, like, am a creative person, and so sometimes I wanna do a million things, and sometimes I wanna do nothing. Yeah, so I have interviews, I'm trying to stick to a cadence that feels sustainable.
Mhm.
I do like doing blog posts every once in a while, on helpful topics that people have requested. I am working on a couple of different courses right now, so I've had some requests of Inside the Lab Interpretation Crash Course, our most popular course. There's 5 modules, and I've had requests of people wanting just to buy one module at a time. And so for now, I'm going to be offering the Renal Lab module, which is urinalysis with microscopy, dipstick, BUN creatinine, and GFR. All of the labs you need to address renal things. Protein creatinine ratio is in there. So that's going to be offered for sale. as well as I'm working on some GYN specific courses that are a little bit on the a little bit more compact than the lab course and the diabetes, hypertension, and CKD course about contraceptives and abnormal uterine bleeding. And so for now, we're working on I'm trying to get the whole company accredited so that anything that we make can have continuing education credit. That's a bit of a process. It's going to take several months. So I'm going to be offering those courses available for learning, but not for credit. Um, so those are going to be coming out. And what else am I working on? I feel like there's another thing, and I can't remember. But I think those are the main things.
I was gonna say
I'm
that's
looking
still
forward
a
to.
lot. Look at
That's a
what
lot
can
of things.
happen when you honor the fact that you're burnt out and you need to step away and resource yourself. You come back with like 12 new things.
Totally,
Well,
totally.
so
So I'm
yeah,
excited for those things.
you've got a lot of exciting things on kind of like on the brink.
Yeah.
For
And I'm
now,
also
how
reaching
can
out to
people
specialists too.
Right. Oh
I'm
yeah, you
working
said
yeah,
collaborative. There's going to be some collaborative stuff coming up
collaborative
or with
stuff,
this
yeah. We're
yeah,
not accredited
with
yet, but I
specialists.
still wanna work with them and see if what we can do to make some courses.
Yeah, yeah. So, how can people or how would you like for people to stay connected to you, to engage with you? Is it Instagram?
Yeah,
Is it the podcast? Is it a newsletter? What's your
yeah.
preferred methodology? All of the above.
Yeah, I mean, I really do love when people are on the email list. Sabrina is our team assistant who intercepts all the emails. But I really do appreciate hearing from people that way. But yeah, joining the email list. The resource guide is at realworldnp.com/guide if people want to join that way. But subscribing to the podcast, if that's something that you like to listen to, or subscribing on YouTube is always awesome because that shows support so that it gets shown to more people. But yeah, if you're interested, especially if you're a student and you're thinking about, interpreting your analysis, I think that's like the main request that I get from students because they're like, I just want that module right now. Like that would be mainly for students. So yeah, I think those would be like the main ways. And if you're interested in those two courses with the abnormal uterine bleeding and contraceptives, then being on the email list is the best place to find that out. So
Okay.
yeah.
And I can imagine that all of the links for the newsletter and
Oh
even,
yeah, yeah.
Instagram and whatever else, that'll all be in the show notes so people
Oh
can find it
yes,
very easily.
absolutely.
All right. Is there anything else that you didn't get a chance to say or you want the listeners to know before we say goodbye?
Well, I would love for them to check out your stuff.
Stop
I don't know
it.
where I should direct them. Well, I think I just want to put a plug in for you because there are so many people who want to see a difference in the healthcare industry, especially when it comes to bias, systemic oppression, racism, sexism, like all of those pieces. And I think that there's so much more to it than I think that a lot of people realize before they get into that journey. And I think that your stuff is really helpful support, but I also know that your business is shifting. So is there a place that I can send people? I mean, your podcast is according to Wheeze, right? That's going to be where it's
Yep.
released.
So the
Cool.
podcast is according to Wheeze. The Instagram where there's going to be educational stuff is according to Wheeze. There's a Patreon for the podcast. I also separately have the Collective, which is a membership space that has tons of education and like over access to over like 500 videos that I've made over the course of life, which is why I laughed. I'm like, if y'all didn't like Liz's videos, because I refuse to code switch in my videos. I'll be in there cussing sometimes. Like, you're gonna get a whole human
Yeah.
all the time because you know what? Sometimes the stuff makes me mad, and even as an educator, I'm like, let's talk about systemic racism. I'm pissed, whatever. So yeah, so you can check it out there. There are some shifts coming, but
Mhm.
if you are interested in seeing what those shifts are, following me on Instagram and then joining the newsletter via the website, louisaduran.com or recordingtoweeze.com. They take you to the same place. There's a newsletter link at the bottom. And that's the best way to stay tapped in. Um,
Cool.
all of my courses are also available for self-paced. So regardless of what I end up doing with my energy and time, you can always just go buy them and do self-study.
Totally. Totally. I have people start with culture of whiteness
Culture of
first,
whiteness. Yeah. Yeah. I
especially if
think that's the
you're
best.
a white person.
Yeah. I think that's the best intro point. because it's just straight up education. There's none of the like,
Mhm.
now let's unpack the way that the system has traumatized you. You don't have to go there yet. The Culture of Whiteness is a 4-part lecture
Just learn some
series,
stuff.
4 distinct lectures, and each one I think is about 90 minutes long. Some might be a little bit longer, but and they're very conversational, right? I try to make it as digestible and easy as for people to grasp as possible, because um, who wants to sit around and listen to me lecture? You know, even when I was lecturing at Berkeley, the kids were like, "What? Like, you're just like talking to us?" And I'm like, "Yeah, because it's not like I don't
Doesn't have
even
to
want
be
to use all
boring.
the big boring words. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I'd rather you pay
Totally.
attention.
Yes.
That's is
Well, that's
why
how
I'm
I feel like
talking to you like a
medical
regular person.
totally. Well, I feel like that's what medical education is like. It's like you have to be all, like, stuffy
Yeah,
and buttoned
very
up, and it
serious.
has to be in this way and professional, and it's like, we're just doing we're all humans trying to do a job here, so, like, let's just talk like regular people. Totally. Well, thank you so
It
much for
is. I'm
sharing, and thanks
yeah.
for being on here.
No, thanks for having me. Thanks for the plug. All right, y'all. I think I'll end the episode. That's our episode
Cool.
for today.
Beautiful.
Um, Check out all the links, click all the places, do all the following. And definitely, 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 if you are an NP trying to have more real world experience and support and education, please consider investing in yourself by working directly with Liz in the company.
Awesome. Thank
That's
you.
it. All right. You're
Woohoo!
welcome.